The last speaker for this session is Jennifer Marland from the National Museum of the United States Navy, and from all the way from the Navy Yard in Washington.
Okay. Does this advance?
It should work.
Excellent. I know. High-tech PowerPoint here. It was a bittersweet day for the colonial fleet as a once cutting-edge Battlestar Galactica was dedicated as a museum ship. No longer a warship that protected the people of the 12 colonies, Galactica would now become a relic, a place to inspire Academy cadets and young students. This dedication didn't even rate a top-level politician. Only the Education Secretary, 43rd in line of succession from the presidency. And the ship was not the only relic of that long-ago war against the Cylons that was on its way to retirement. Her top officer, Commander William Adama, a veteran of the Cylon War, had been assigned this twilight cruise to allow him to retire with honor after that botched mission aboard Battlestar Valkyrie. Adama was notoriously paranoid, not even allowing the latest navigation programs to be installed, and seemed delighted to keep this 50-year-old technology working, and his crew training to fight a war that stopped being fought 40 years ago. Manual hatches, no computer-controlled landings, the ship was a relic of the past, just like the Mark II Vipers that had already been installed in the landing bay on its transformation from a ship of war to a tourist attraction. This is my favorite line from the miniseries. The ship's crew even found the commander's old Viper in a junkyard and restored it to flying shape for that ceremony. But through the traitorous sabotage by trusted scientist Dr. Gaius Baltar, a fault was placed in the newest colonial fleet operating system that would disable all ships with a single command. Dr. Baltar was influenced by a female Cylon operative who played to his ego and exploited flaws in his character. But because it was behind the times, one Battlestar, the Galactica, was not affected and was able to flee from the 12 colonies while providing protection to a motley fleet of unaffected ships on a quest to save the human race. By not being up to date, but still kept in operational shape, Galactica was able to repel an attack, despite major systems like the FTL drive not being used for 22 years. This is the opening of the incredibly bingeable 2003 reimagining of the 1978 series Battlestar Galactica. And for all the changes, I postulate that the heart of the show remained the same. A ragtag fleet on a lonely quest into the unknown for a shining planet known as Earth. But what, besides a really good 84 hours of entertainment? I know. I've done this in preparation for this talk. Do both these shows have to do with today's Navy? As science fiction is about ideas, I say that in these shows there are lessons for today's Navy and for the Navy of tomorrow. After all, if all this has happened before and all this will happen again, shouldn't we pay some attention to the idea that sometimes old technology is the right answer? The CNP, Command Navigation Program, was an operating system designed for use among most civilian and military colonial spacefaring vessels. At the time of the Cylon attack, the CNP had been installed in over 95% of the ships. During this, the attack, the Cylons took over approaching ships and fighters, disabling any that came close to firing on the base stars or raiders. Because of the connectivity between the systems, the backdoor allowed all but a few ships to be immobilized before the fight could start. But, as stated in the press briefing, the Battlestar Galactica designers designed a ship to operate against an enemy that could infiltrate and disrupt even the most basic computer systems. The designers of this class of Battlestar looked backwards for protection. And this backwards thinking helped kept humanity alive over 40 years after the cause of the design decision stopped fighting and retreated from the galaxy. As we introduce more and more integrated technology into our lives and on our fleet, one has to wonder if there is a downside to all this integration. It may be convenient that your cell phone can turn on lights, lock doors, and remote start your car. I use all of these. But what if someone took control of these and used these conveniences for nefarious purposes? Might there be some good in making sure there is some air between systems? In 2016, okay, first of all, show of hands. What is this? Is it a save icon? Or is this a floppy? Or these are all floppies. But it came to light that the Pentagon was still using 1970s era technology to run ICBMs. And these required 8-inch floppy disks over here. Some might chuckle and think how antiquated, but really, how many of us still have a computer, maybe sitting in your basement, that can still run use any of these systems? Another lesson of the show is that there are low-tech ways to disrupt and infiltrate an organization. In both series, the traitor Baltar aided in the destruction of the colonies by providing the Cylons a way past colonial defenses. Playing upon his ego and greed, original series Baltar falsified official records to downplay the usefulness of the mining on Carillon and helped the Cylons set up Carillon as a secret base from which they would later cause great annoyance to the colonial fleet. Reimagined Dr. Gaius Baltar falls for a honey trap. As a Cylon known as Caprica 6 plays to his vanity and libido to allow her to rewrite half the algorithms and place her malicious code in the CNP. He provided her knowledge of communications frequencies, software deployment schedules, and entry into every database Baltar, with his position as contractor for the Ministry of Defense, had access. on the sea since before the American Revolution. They do not rely upon electricity, and so are always ready for use. Combined with paper charts and a maritime chronometer, any trained sailor can find their location day or night without plugging anything in or making sure the battery was charged. And as I am a museum person, this fabulous chronometer can be seen at the National Museum of the United States Navy. It was used by the USS Essex during World War II and is in our navigation exhibit. But back on Galactica, much of the day-to-day operations of the fleet are carried out on paper, octagonal pieces of paper, but paper nevertheless. As Commander Adama said, history's first draft will be written in our logs. The logs and reports provide information about what happened and why that cannot easily be changed as digital files. Today, the military is in a complicated situation as electronic records are both easy to create and easy to lose. Equipment failure, limited storage, and concerns about transmitting sensitive or classified data have all led to loss of information that may be useful to historians and definitely useful to military planners. Starting with the desktop computer revolution, official records were no longer created with carbon copies for filing. Printing out the material is seen as redundant until a hard drive fails. And you have to somehow cobble together all of that information from the few records that are printed out or justify your entire service history based on records that exist. Recently, it came to light that years of Army field reports were lost due to not having a clear plan to collect, store, and archive the material. The response to this has been to save every file version, every email, burying the important information amidst the trivial and the repetitive. Critical information reports should be stored in multiple formats, ideally in different locations, but may I suggest paper? A book that was written hundreds of years ago is still good today, and it's definitely going to outlast my e-reader, let alone any of the computers that are sitting in my basement waiting to go to electronic recycling. When the remnants of the colonial fleet finally find a planet to call home, they find that it is already inhabited by persons at a hunter-gatherer level of technology. Having seen the 13 colonies destroyed by an over-reliance on technology, the survivors choose to leave their ships, settle with few belongings, and start again. They hope that this time, their descendants can get things right. The designers of Galactica created a spaceship that looked to the past for security. Our future adversaries may not be on the cutting edge, but oppose the Navy with older technology used with great skill. Understanding how to use these technologies can lead to ways to defend against them or use them in times of everything else failing. Appreciation for what has worked in the past is essential to planning for the future. Today, as we move in an ever-increasing digital world, we should not forget how to function offline. As a museum curator, I think there is absolutely no better place to learn about naval history than by visiting a Navy museum. You can start with the one right here and then come down to Washington, D.C. and say hi to me. But where you can learn about through history, through artifact stories about the sailors and the ships they sailed, because the lessons of history should not be forgotten, lest we repeat the worst and forget the best. So say we all.